Bye.
Yep, no problem.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Bloodgood. I'm the Risk Control Manager for NYMER, and welcome to today's Workplace Violence Prevention webinar. This webinar is going to fulfill your annual compliance obligation for getting this training. For those of you who registered through the Zoom link that we provided, you will receive a certificate of completion from NYMER once this is over after a couple of weeks. So give it a couple of weeks because it will take that much time for us to get these generated and out to you. But you'll receive those, and anyone who is watching along with those registered participants and you're watching somebody else's screen, you need to have an on-site sign-in sheet that you record your name onto, and that's what documents this training for you, okay? So that gets kept on file, and it's every bit as good as those folks who are receiving the certificate. It's just that we can track the time that those who registered through Zoom are on with us, and we can't for the rest. So you just need to maintain a sign-in sheet for all of those folks. So with that, let's get going. Okay, so what is workplace violence? It's not just a physical act purely. It's any physical assault or acts of aggressive behavior like verbal threats or displays of force and stalking, or other threatening behavior that rises to the level of perception of potential violence occurring in the work setting. Now, that can mean online social media as well. If it affects the workplace, just because you may be on your own Facebook page, that's on your own IP address and your own router and all that, you're not protected. Or those who may perpetrate some kind of behavior that can be identified as aggressive and targeting somebody in the workplace, they're not protected just because they're on their own device. If it affects the workplace, these laws are designed to apply. So, and it also includes any location where work is completed. So many of us travel around and go to different sites to complete our job tasks. That could be even a highway worker heading on over to the next town to help them out for a day. Anywhere where you're going to perform your job, you're protected by these laws. They apply. A lot of people recognize that school violence, attacks on schools, school shootings, they're part of the landscape these days, and it certainly falls under workplace violence. What most people don't realize is that this is nothing new. The Bath school disaster was perpetrated by a custodian at this school back in 1927. He was obviously a very angry and devious person. He killed 38 elementary school children and 6 adults and injured at least another 58 persons. And the way that he went about it was that, well, first he killed his wife and firebombed his farm. I mean, this guy was obviously considering that he's at the end of his road. So he had nothing to lose. He detonated a major explosion at the Bath Consolidated School. But that wasn't the end of it. He waited until people were there helping out, trying to rescue people. Then he drove his own truck up that was filled with dynamite and shrapnel and detonated it, killing himself and many other people to arrive at that total. And it remains to this day the deadliest school massacre in the US. The way that this kind of evolved and the genesis of the law in New York State came about back in the early 90s. There was a guy in his mid-50s, and he had served time in prison a long time for violent crimes. And even though he lived in Ohio, he still had to pay back child support to his significant other back in New York. So he had to appear at that time. I guess he couldn't just mail it in. He appeared in person every month to the county facility over in Watkins Glen. And he became more ominous and threatening as time went along. And the women that worked in that office recognized that and felt threatened and complained to their managers. But really, nothing was done about it. And then one day, after about 6 months, he came in and shot these four women dead. Phyllis Caslin, 54 years old, 50-year-old Florence Pike, 48-year-old Nancy Wheeler, and 28-year-old Denise Van Amberg. I say those names because, they're not just statistics, they're actual people that lived in that area. Their families still are there. It's 1992, 30 years is not a long time. These memories are still with those people that are living, those family members and friends. And we certainly want to be aware of that in the event that any specter of that kind of behavior arrives on our doorstep. Sheriff's deputies heard the shots and came running across the street. He told them, when he met them, that, hey, I did what I came to do, and he shot himself. And, as these things often end, he took his own life, didn't stick around to suffer the consequences through the legal process. Here's a guy that lived up in Kingston. He's facing felony, or in 2017, he faced felony charges for making terroristic threats. He threatened violence against employees of the Ulster County Department of Social Services. So this was in mid-September of 2017, and the detectives received the complaint, and on the 26th, they arrested him and charged him with making a terroristic threat, which is a felony, of course. So he was placed in jail in lieu of bond, and I'm sure that cost him a great deal of money, at the very least, in attorney's fees and all. But regardless, his words were what counted as the perception that violence could occur. He made a phone call and threatened violence. So the likely assumption was that he could show up on the doorstep and follow through on his threats. He probably just thought, hey, I'm just, popping off at the mouth here. But, words are, in fact, deeds in this case. In 2014, the FBI did a study of the previous 5 years, and they found that during that time, so the 2009 to 2014, workplace violence had gone up by more than a quarter. Okay, so for every 4 events previously, 1 more was added to them. Municipalities are often considered soft targets, and that's sometimes because they're open to the public. It's not like a private company that may have very, very tight controls just built into their systems for years because of whatever trade secrets or one thing or another. You serve the public. You work for the public. They come in to transact with you. And so, many municipalities, most in fact, don't have police departments. And certainly their police department may not be right on site. So they're considered soft targets. Unfortunately, when an active shooter event takes place, it's very, very rapid that it unfolds and that the toll is taken. So 90 to 120 seconds is basically how long an active shooter event lasts. It's very difficult for help to get there and to be effective within that framework. So you really need to be aware of when things are looking threatening and know what to do at that moment. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, almost 21,000 workers in the private industry experienced trauma from non-fatal work violence in 2019. Now, these incidents required days away from work. They may have been a physical assault. They may have been something that was just mentally traumatizing and took away their ability to be productive and to show up for work. These things can take a number of different forms. They may have been intimidated and afraid to show up. That's a big number. Of those victims who experienced trauma from workplace violence, 68% were female. Now, in the municipal realm, females are often the point people that the public comes in to transact with. It could be the clerk or the treasurer, the court clerk. There are any number of different functions that place women in contact with the public. 65% were aged 25 to 54. Not surprising, those are the active working years, prime working years. 70% worked in healthcare and social assistance industry. So perhaps the social services departments at counties might be particularly vulnerable, but you have to remember that there's a lot of crossover. You're actually, a town clerk or a village clerk, a tax collector. You're working with, folks that often it's some problem that brought them in to for you to help them with. So, there's a bit of crossover there. 21% of these folks who experienced trauma required 31 days or more, so a month or more, away from work to recover. And 20% involved 3 to 5 days away from work. So that's really, a work week. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics as well, in 2018, 453 US workers were the victims of workplace homicide. Of those victims who died from workplace violence, 82% were male. Now, whereas females may experience a higher level of workplace violence potential when the rubber meets the road and when something really escalates, and there could be a number of factors involved with this, and it could be perhaps a lack of training. There may be something that's more confrontational. Males were victimized in a fatal incident in a greater number of instances than females. 47% were white. 66% were between 25 and 54. Now remember, workplace violence also, and that's why it's not just a workers' comp issue, but rather a liability issue for municipalities. It's that you do serve the public. And sometimes the public that you're serving is victimized by this workplace violence incident. They may have been there unwittingly, been just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, protecting your public as well as yourselves is something that you need to keep in mind. 20% were working in sales or related occupations. So this obviously is not just geared this slide to municipal workers, but 20% were working in sales and related occupations. 19% were performing protective service activities. So again, you think of your county social services or mental health services, and also obviously people that commit these type of acts often have mental health as the bottom line issue. So, police talk about this all the time, that the mentally ill are their most frequent big problem. And that can spill over to any of the municipal workers that come into contact with the public. In 2020, gun violence killed nearly 20,000 Americans, according to data from the Gun Violence Archive, more than any other year in at least 2 decades. And I think that anecdotally, we all recognize from watching the news over the last year that some crazy things have been going on. COVID may have had a outsized impact on the negative behavior that people undertake. But whatever, this was kind of a shocking statistic. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, related to municipal workplace violence, in 2016, 43 government workers were the victims of a fatal attack. 21 were in local municipal government. So sometimes there's the perception, especially when we're listening to the news, that these things happen in these large municipal entities, these big cities. It's not necessarily the case. Yeah, many people have all kinds of problems, and they have grievances perhaps with their municipality or with their taxes or with something that the building department, like a code enforcement, didn't uh, decide in their favor. So a lot of these things can have the potential to occur in a smaller venue. More fatalities were recorded from homicides among municipal workers than any other cause except for roadway issues. So we all know that vehicle incidents, municipalities are out there doing many functions: police, clearing the roads, all manner of visitation when it gets to the county level. So there's a lot of people driving for their municipal job description. So it's not too surprising that that would exceed the number of homicides, but still, homicides was number two. According to the Society of Human Resource Workplace Management, almost 2/3 of human resource professionals stated there had been some form of violence at their organization within the 3-year time span. Now, if you look at this list, it's pretty clear and obvious, and it makes sense that you're going to have a lot more incidents of inappropriate language or verbal abuse than you are pushing and shoving or fistfights, and more of them than you would actual robbery or stalking, things like that. But these are the things that happen. So, as it turns out, male government employees, according to this study that was part of the Bureau of Justice, more male government employees were more likely to be than females to face a stranger in an incident of workplace violence. So again, this could be a training issue. De-escalation really needs to be a factor in training, and we're going to address some of that in future slides before we're done. Female government employees were more likely than male government employees to be attacked in the workplace by someone with whom they had a work relationship. So, you might give some thought to that. It's hard. I would only be speculating if I were to identify or try to identify a reason for that. So municipal employees face a high rate of workplace violence. 20% of all violent fatalities occurred in the public sector. So that does, of course, include police, and police probably absorb a reasonable amount of that, of course. But still, the next highest was retail, and so they deal with large numbers of people in retail. So and yet many more people, in fact, than municipalities do, but they still represented a slightly lower percentage of these violent fatalities. Getting back to counties and social work, this chart shows kind of a breakdown of experience within those job functions related to physical assault, assault from adolescent or child, assault from a non-client. Perhaps it was verbal, or they had their car vandalized, or they were robbed. Those who experienced it, witnessed it, knew or heard about it. Okay. So you can just, and by the way, my email is at the end of this, and any of you can contact me and I can send you this PowerPoint if you want to take another look at it, have it on hand, perhaps use it if you're a trainer in-house, so that in the future you have it at your disposal, okay? Police line of duty deaths, 2004 to 2014, which was the last 10-year study that was done. So when you add up all these, well, first off, some states really had a lot more than others. Like Vermont had one, I think, two. Okay, but New York had 236 line of death duties. Texas had 232. We led the pack, unfortunately. When you add all of these up over 10 years, it comes to an average of about 226 per year. We had 245 police line of duty deaths from COVID alone last year. These numbers are typically on the rise. Again, just anecdotally, we watch the news, we see that police are often targeted. They've got a tough job out there, and part of what they do is protect you in your workplace. So having a good relation with your local police department and knowing how to contact them and who to contact for the most rapid response, it's a real good idea to make sure that you understand all of that sooner rather than later, and remind each other about it as time goes on. Make it part of your training. More officers are killed by vehicle accidents than any other single cause. So you can add gunfire and heart attacks together, and it's still not as many as die behind the wheel. Firefighters are at risk too. Many of you will remember around the Utica area back in 2015 when this guy had a rifle and he had a little sniper perch, and he lured in firefighters to battle a blaze that he set himself, and he killed two of them. They were pinned down until help arrived from the police. But a number of homes were destroyed as firefighters waited for police to secure the scene. And this guy had, a grievance that this is how he decided to take it out. Says there was speculation that he was upset because his mother made a donation to the fire department before her recent death, but who knows? Somebody that does something like this is really off balance, but those people are out there. And whatever their motivation is, you can't predict it. You just have to kind of be ready for it. Know it happens out there. Job-related homicides were the third leading cause of deaths for all workers. Okay, for all workers. So we've identified there's a lot of folks who are out there driving and may have a vehicle incident that results in their passing. There are many dangerous jobs out there. Thinking in like construction, high-rise construction, and many other high-risk activities beyond police, but including them too. So workplace risk evaluations are very, very important. Workplace violence is the #1 cause of occupational death for female employees now, and it's the #2 cause for male employees, again, perhaps behind vehicle incidents. The numbers that you see typically for an annual workplace violence prevention total are actually not the real numbers, because up to 4 to 5 incidents go absolutely unreported. So it's a problem that once it comes to the attention of management, they really need to take it very seriously and act upon it, because where there's smoke, there's fire. Typically, most people are going to be coming to you with something that is genuine and something that is affecting them to the point where they actually were motivated to report it. If 4 to 5 go unreported, that means that sometimes it takes somebody a lot before they actually go for help. There's 4 different categories of workplace violence. The first type, violent acts by criminals who have no other connection to the workplace. They just come in to commit some sort of a crime or to enrich themselves through robbery or one thing or another. Think of the corner deli being held up for its cash registers. So that's type 1. They don't know anybody there. They just know that there's some cash on hand. Type 2, violence directed at employees by customers, clients, patients, students, inmates, any others for whom the organization provides services. That's all you folks that we're talking to today. You serve the public, so you may more frequently come into this type of violent incident rather than the first type. This guy here is the one who first brought workplace violence to our collective attention in many cases. I know that I never gave it a second thought until way back in the 80s. All of a sudden, this guy perpetrated the first incident where he shot a total of 20 coworkers before killing himself, and 14 of those coworkers died as a result of the attack. But then, as you recall, many other incidents happened in post offices for a while, and going postal actually became part of our vernacular. So I said there were 4 types of workplace violence. The third category is violence against coworkers, supervisors, or managers by a present or former employee. So again, it's obvious that this affects any workplace. You're no exception. Private, public, doesn't matter. You can have a disgruntled person who is released from duty for any number of reasons, and they may have an axe to grind. Type 4 is violence committed in the workplace by somebody who doesn't work there but has a personal relationship with one of your employees. It could be a marriage, falling apart, or a domestic partnership splitting up, or it could even be, child, parent, who knows? But basically, it's one of those things where the employee, when they go to management to talk about it, this can be a very, very sensitive and private topic for them. So we'll talk about how privacy and confidentiality is important in all of this. But you can imagine how, there are some scenarios that just are not for public consumption, but need to be acted on effectively to keep everybody safe. Everybody doesn't need to know all the details, but they do need to be kept safe through one way or another. So management has a lot of responsibilities on their shoulders here. It may not even be about work. It's easy to think about a disgruntled worker that has an axe to grind at work and they come in and perpetrate violence, but 2/3 of workplace homicides, there's no known personal relationship to the victims themselves. So they are acting out in a destructive manner and doing so indiscriminately and without any personal axe to grind against the victims. Most people have bad parts of their lives. They may be unhappy for one reason or another, but they don't act out in a violent fashion. There may be something going on in their lives that motivates them to act out in this way, though. So I guess the takeaway there is really, when you see somebody that's unhappy, and they may be unhappy and surly and grouchy or whatever, they may even seem unapproachable, they're not necessarily going to create harm. So there's no reason to look at each and every one of these incidents as a serious threat. But it is something to keep in the back of your mind, especially if there's an escalation in the manner in which these folks express themselves, or especially if there is kind of a threatening edge to things over time. So employee assistance programs should be part of the landscape for people to get help and help them come out of whatever dark times they're having. And employees should be encouraged to take advantage of this resource. It can, if it's needed and they take advantage of it, it can really reduce that potential for a bad occurrence. So let's talk about some risk factors. Handling money or contact with the public. Obviously, these things are pretty obvious. Working later at night or alone. It's not too uncommon in municipalities that are maybe a real rural entity that have very few employees. I've walked into a building that was a pretty rural area of Rensselaer County, and there was a clerk there, a young woman who the building was completely unlocked. She was all by herself. The sheriff's office was 10 miles one way, the state police 10 miles the other way, and they really think that in a way they're kind of like living in Mayberry, and what can happen out here? Nothing's going to happen. I know all the people that come in and all. Unfortunately, these days we can't make those kind of assumptions. Working alone is not a good idea if it can be avoided, and if it can't be avoided, then you really need to build in some security. Perhaps a bulletproof screen, a locked door for sure. They can transact through a transaction window, quick access to emergency numbers, those type of things. So training is very important so that you recognize when something is wrong and can act on it before there's an opportunity for something bad to happen. Poor outdoor lighting, if in the wintertime, as it's coming up, it's getting darker earlier. Many of us are going to be going home after work, walking out of the office or wherever your workstation is. It's going to be dark out there. So you really need to have good lighting. If parking lot lights are out, replace them. Limited access to emergency services, as I used in my example. So setting up a workplace violence prevention program. Now, all of you should have this in place at this time. It's been a requirement for some time, but what it entails for all of you who are kind of rank and file and weren't responsible for the nuts and bolts of getting the plan in place, what it really requires is that there's a written plan or policy statement and policy statement. The policy statement is a very simple statement that the municipality is concerned with the safety and welfare of their employee and will take good faith measures to assure their safety. And so identify a team to investigate incidents. That team should include people that are familiar with the policy, familiar with the facilities. It needs to be inclusive of rank and file. So it can't be just top, management alone, because rank and file, they talk to each other. And somebody may feel more comfortable talking about their own particular situation where they sit there and work every day with a coworker than they would a manager, especially if it's a supervisor and they don't necessarily interact with that person regularly, may not feel especially, at ease in communicating with them. So think about how town halls over time may have been in the same building for years and years, and your staff perhaps has grown a little bit, and you have to make do with this existing facility. So you have somebody down in a place that's kind of a little isolated, maybe near an entrance that should be locked, but is not locked. And so things like this need to be communicated. So that's part of your workplace risk evaluation. You need to pull these different aspects together effectively, and that means clear and comfortable lines of communication. You need to develop incident reporting and review process, train your employees. The type of hazard control and prevention, they might include administrative controls like performing your job in a different or safer way to make sure that you're safe. It could be an engineering type of fix where you have coded entry into certain areas, so somebody can't just open the door, and if there's keys that have existed for a long time, then they could be in other people's hands over time, or perhaps even ex-employees' hands still have keys in them that they shouldn't. Codes can be changed easily, all that sort of thing. So all this stuff needs to be reviewed annually as well. Things change. So again, with participation of an employee representative, the board adopts a policy statement. They review it annually. Risk factors are identified from a review of workplace evaluations. Now, that could be a team with a checklist. And we'll see. NYMER has checklists. They have employee surveys, which employees can fill out and hand in, and you have a means of communicating your concerns. Methods to prevent incidents of occupational assaults and homicides. Again, these can be ways of doing your job. They can be ways of entering a building or keeping people out. They could be cameras, panic buttons. Methods of incident reporting, investigating, and follow-up. It's very important to evaluate when something did happen to see if it can be prevented, if it slipped through the net of protections that you had created. Also, sometimes elected officials, they may not be aware of previous incidents that occurred. So maybe there were 2 other incidents within the last 4 to 10 years, and they come across a new incident, and it's the only one in their mind. So it's a one-off to them, but perhaps it's not. Perhaps there's some similarities in those incidents that occurred before. So the workplace, the response team takes a look at the physical plant, in other words, where you work, the facility itself, entrances, public access, interaction, exterior lights, emergency systems that you have in place, employee input, again, surveys, interviews, identifying hazards, making sure that those who can decide on and implement protective measures are aware of these, and reviewing previous incidents. They can be any number of things, from police reports to past illness or accident reports. All employees need to be trained and brought up to speed on how to access their policies, what kind of protective measures are in place, and how to make sure that you're not defeating them through just an unintended act or whatever. I used to go through a lot of school districts, and schools are buttoned up pretty tight these days. Everybody goes through that front door, and they may hand in their license and get an ID that's printed out, and they put it on their chest, and everybody knows who's in that building. But on these nice days of spring and into the summer, sometimes you still see teachers kicking the door open and so that they get some fresh air in or whatever. Now, unfortunately, people that are intent on committing a violent act, or they go about things in a very intentional way, and they may take a look at the facility and evaluate it, identify its points of weakness, and those vulnerabilities are important to keep in mind. So you don't want to compromise those protections that are in place through kind of convenience or comfort. It's there to protect everybody, and you don't want to compromise the protection that is afforded to you and all of your coworkers and friends. So you need to just be aware of all of this stuff, and it's part of the training process. So here's a policy statement. It's just one page. It's signed by the board. It's a commitment by management, and it indicates that there is employee involvement, so that it's not just a top-down process. And it needs to be approved every year. And whoever is on the emergency response team, if you have one of those, if you're a larger entity, those names should be recorded on there. People come and go, so you want to make sure you know who is a person that's particularly knowledgeable and has part of their responsibility is to address these sort of things, so that you can express concerns that you might have or talk to them about things you're unclear on. Workplace security checklists are pretty extensive, and they go into many areas of evaluation of a facility, from its exterior points of entry to areas that might be more sensitive and blocked off within the building, areas that are protected by coded access or fob that you pass along a sensor. Now, these things also record, as many of you know, who is coming in and when. So it kind of, helps there be some accountability. But it's really an important device in making sure that the workplace is as safe as it can be. This is just a sample employee questionnaire. Now, these can be sent to any of you. All you have to do is email me and make the request, and I'll send these forms directly to you so that you can have them on hand. So this employee questionnaire, an employee, they're the ones who know how they feel during the day, what makes them feel unsafe, and may have ideas about how to correct that situation. An incident report, what details should be recorded? Well, obviously the day and when it happened, who may have been around that you could get witness statements from, any number of different things. So when do you make a report? When is there that perception of that workplace violence may be something that's that's more likely than not as time moves along? So you have a continuum here from discourtesy up to physical aggression. So if somebody's being discourteous to you, do you make a report then? Or if they're showing you disrespect, do you make a report then? I would say that at a minimum, once it reaches intimidation, that is when a report should be made. It may take quite a while for somebody to go from being discourteous in their expression to others to being disrespectful. But once intimidation, once it reaches that point of intimidation, then violence is really possibly right around the corner and can happen very quickly. So at that point, you really need to report it. It should be required in your policy. So when you have an incident report, it's to be completed by the appropriate supervisors and reviewed with the employee. So the employee fills out an incident report, gives it to their supervisor. Not everybody is equally good at describing in words what they have in their mind. So the supervisor needs to interview the employee to make sure that they understand what's being communicated and to make notes. And then an investigation needs to be completed. That investigation needs to take place pronto, and it needs to be brought to a conclusion fairly quickly. The place could be under threat during that time of the investigation. So you really need to go about it in a very business-like fashion. Confidentiality needs to be stressed, but that's not the same as as keeping it secret or whatever. You're going to have to talk to witnesses in many cases, but those witnesses, if they're called upon to shed some light on an incident or an environment that's been created over time, they need to keep it confidential. This could be like in that fourth type of workplace violence where there are personal relationships that are going south or whatever. It could be a very sensitive topic. So they are responsible for stepping up and talking about their experience as a witness, but they are also responsible for not going back to their workstation and saying, this is what's going on and here's all the dirt. You can get in trouble for that sort of thing. And so confidentiality is very important. No retaliation is, retaliation as we've experienced in sexual harassment training and everything. It can take any form from any different person. It could be a supervisor who retaliates because you dropped one more thing to do on their desk that they think you should be able to handle on your own. It could be a witness that didn't want to be dragged into something. It could be the perpetrator against the complainant. It can take any number of forms, but retaliation is off the table in all its forms for everyone. I know this one city that we used to and no longer insure. There was a complaint of against the sanitation director. And the first thing he did was storm back to his office and call that guy out in front of everybody and say, what the hell, you know? And that was the wrong thing to do. Got in a lot of trouble for that. So your emergency response team has to respond to an incident within 24 hours or less. Okay, you really need to jump on it. Identify the issues. If there's union membership involved, the union should be included in this. But remember, if you're a union member and you have a shop steward or whatever, that isn't necessarily the compliance officer that you need to complain to. Sure, your union may be able to provide you with some assistance, but the compliance officers, those that are designated to handle these complaints, they need to be in the loop firsthand, first person, okay? So because they're the ones that are responsible for making the corrective actions and doing the investigations. Team members from the same department as those involved should recuse themselves from doing the investigation, and any kind of recommended action should be taking place within 10 days. The team that does the investigation, it can review incident reports, C2 forms. Those reflect injuries and illnesses that may have occurred, police reports, union grievances, records of threats. So you want to collect and assess data from your building inspections and employee surveys to see if they identified, or if these these type of situations, or if something needs to be amended. And an overview needs to be created and reported to municipal leaders annually, so that you have a picture of what happened over the past 12-month period, and it's there as a baseline. You can determine whether you're making progress or if things are not going well, need to be amended somewhat. So the written program needs to include workplace or job risk factors. Training should be department specific also. Now, what we're doing today is basically an awareness training. Keeping this stuff top of mind is hugely important, and dealing with the overall issues that define workplace violence is important and needs to be done every year, but so does department-specific training. Anybody working in one department faces perhaps a different potential for workplace violence than those in other departments. Obviously, police is going to be far different than highway DPW, and they are far different from the town clerk. So you really need to address these things department specific. Measures employees can take to protect themselves. So you might consider things that places you can go in an emergency, places you can lock down. You don't want to be trapped in a little space where people that are kind of confronting you have you sort of cornered. You might want to think about what kind of impromptu weapons you might be able to use to protect yourself if it came to that. And you also want to think about the things that are on your desk that could be used against you as well. You don't want to have some big paperweight sitting there that somebody can come up and hit you with, or scissors that are sitting there that somebody can, once they're all worked up, can pick up and assault you with. Okay. Employee training needs to include the details of the written workplace violence prevention program. It can tell you things that from your own work perspective, you're not necessarily aware of, but affect the overall safety of the workplace. So the various things that are enumerated here should be part of your department-specific training, as well as any training that takes place at your municipality. This is a generalized training. We're talking to many people today from different places. Each of those different places has different things that they themselves should be talking about when compared to, like if you're a small village compared to a big town. We're going to talk about some techniques for recognizing potential risks and procedures to control risk. You need to know about whatever security hardware you have in place, as we talked about before. Some of this we've mentioned, but how to get medical assistance, how to handle cash. Obviously, it's not, I said before that somebody that intends to do some harm or that intends to enrich themselves somehow, if there's poor cash handling, that can make people more vulnerable. Is it safe to go to the bank at the same time on the same day every week in the same car by the same route? Or is it better to switch those things up and have perhaps a few different people responsible at different times, different days, to do it? It seems obvious once you put it into words, but it's amazing how people fall into a rhythm or a set of habits that may be convenient, but are not sort of a best practice. Everybody has to be trained in workplace violence. So part-time, full-time, seasonal, volunteers, elected and appointed officials. That means your judges, your code enforcement. If that code enforcement works somewhere else, they still need to be trained with you. Okay. Anyone whose actions are directed by the municipality need to be trained. So if you work for multiple municipalities, do you have to take this class at each location? Well, you may have gotten the general training like we're doing today at one location, but it's not a one and done. If you work for more than one municipality, again, each municipality is different. Your job function may be different. Certainly the facility that you report to and may be responsible for acting within is different from one municipality to another. So yeah, you do need to be trained at each location. You can get a letter from your other employer to show you've already taken that training, but and that may suffice for today's general training, but it's certainly not department specific. So again, elected and appointed officials, yes, everybody has to be trained. So we're going to talk about how to identify and deal with a potential situation at this point. So if somebody is confronting you, they come in and they're all worked up, you want to be projecting interest in what they have to say. Okay, you want to let them speak their mind and bring the temperature in the room down a little. You want to be, it could be the most important thing to them in their lives at that moment. You really need to recognize that, make it the most important thing for you at that moment. But remain relaxed and project a state of calmness, okay? You don't want to be all twitchy and nervous and responding sharply to somebody. Position yourself at a right angle so that you have a clear path to exit. Again, you don't want to be cornered. You don't want to have no place to go. Practice empathetic listening. So empathetic means that it's the ability for you to put yourself in their place. So it's not just that, oh, geez, I feel bad for you. It's more like, if I were in your position, I'd probably feel the same way. That's an example of empathetic listening. If unreasonable behavior persists, establish some ground rules. Describe that there's consequences for violent behavior. They may not even recognize how they're ramping up until it's pointed out to them. Use delaying tactics that will give the person time to calm down. It's very difficult for the average person to maintain a full head of steam over time. So, the whole purpose is to lower the temperature in the room and to get them to calm down and start communicating in a more clear fashion that is less likely to escalate. So it's de-escalation. This is something that the police world knows all about and has become increasingly important in our society, unfortunately, on the whole, because people are worked up over all manner of things, including politics and whatever. Accept criticism in a positive way when the person is right, okay? If it's unwarranted, ask clarifying questions. It gives an opportunity to lend shape to their complaint and for them to feel heard and perhaps for them to understand that there's limitations to the help that they have a right or a legitimate expectation to receive. Don't reject all the person's demands right from the start. And don't, by all means, use styles of communication that are going to convey dismissiveness or a challenge or anything like that. Don't stand in challenging positions like crossing your arms or giving them the death stare, putting your hands on your hips. Avoid finger pointing or long periods of sustained eye contact. Obviously, don't make any sudden or threatening movements, and keep the rate and tone and volume of your speech nice and even and calm. Don't challenge, threaten, or dare the person. Certainly don't attempt to bargain with a threatening person. Don't ever make false statements or promises that, once they're not kept, is just going to ramp up this person's level of anger and resentment and perhaps bring them to some next level. And don't, obviously, remember, it could be the most serious thing going on in their lives. So don't make the situation seem less serious than it is. You got to take it as seriously as they are at the time. So when you're thinking about all of this preparation, know your escape routes, know how to shelter in place, where you can lock yourself in and where you'll be protected from intrusion. Know what you can use as improvised weapons for self-protection, but at the same time, keep your desk clear of things that may be used against you. Putting cash in drop safes, making sure, if you have security guards on hand, that, they're reliable and well-trained. Signage, even signs posted that abusive behavior is unacceptable or will not be tolerated. Things like that, that remind people that others may be watching, and that it's to get accomplished what they came to do, they need to be calm and non-threatening. Monitoring access points, having visitors sign in, keeping doors locked, perhaps having fob or coded entrance to various places. Remember to avoid working alone or late at night, and support staff that are feeling threatened. Now, remember that some people, I know that everybody that's listening today knows somebody or maybe multiple people that are just oblivious to what's going on around them. They're like in their own little world. If things were starting to go off the rails, they might not even notice. Training is the key to helping them keep everybody safe. They could be a weak link that, sometimes moments count. And so a little early warning is a good thing. So make sure that people understand that it's part of their responsibility to know when things are not right and to pay attention and to act on it. So deviate daily routines, like the incident the example I used about going to the bank. Screen new staff carefully. Make sure that there's good procedures in place for doing background checks and just screening to make sure that there's not some history that you want to perhaps be aware of and make accommodation for or not hire. Video surveillance. It's easy and cheap these days, folks, and it records. It can help identify somebody, or it can help put somebody on notice that they're being watched. So it's that subliminal thing that somebody's standing there, recognizes there's cameras on them. It can alter their behavior for the better. Consider panic alarms under desks or on phones. Know, the procedures for communicating with 911. So these administrative controls, how you go about your job, state clearly to whomever an agitated person is that violence will not be tolerated or permitted. Make sure you've got good communication and a line of communication and access to local police. They take these incidents seriously. If you report it to them, they're going to take it seriously, okay? So require employees to report all assaults and threats. You never know which one is going to morph into something that spins out of control. Set up trained response teams to respond to emergencies. And that can be Incident response could be supporting the person who was threatened or attacked. It can be identifying the weak links in the chain that led to that incident to begin with. There's a lot of facets to this that need to be considered. So to summarize, leadership needs to be shown by your mayors, your boards, your village councils. That written policy and the procedures to keep your workplace safe need to be taken seriously and committed to by the leadership of your municipality. So that written program needs to identify the various potential weak links in your facilities, in your training, and means of acting on them to improve them. It needs to be reviewed annually. There needs to be a formal reporting process and response program, and the response needs to take place immediately within 24 hours of an incident. Because again, if it's a threatening incident, it can unfold into something that takes it that one step further that can lead to violence and harm very quickly. So evaluate through questionnaires and checklists. This annual large group training is important, but remember, you need to have department-specific training. It's an essential aspect of this workplace violence prevention program. And it's what's going to ultimately have the best effect on keeping everybody safe. So we're right at the hour, and we made it through this. If any of you have further questions, or you'd like to get hold of some of the materials that we either used today or referred to, please feel free to email me or call me, and we'll get that taken care of. So with that, you can get on with your day, hopefully a little more knowledgeable and able to navigate this terrain. And I thank you all for joining us and taking part in this NYMER training. Have a great day.